stories that are happening. Our reporters are across the country to just bring us the latest. Here in studio, we shall be having quite some interesting conversations. The first conversation will be about empowering Kenyans digitally to ensure that we take up the online jobs and online enabled jobs that are available. That conversation will be coming to you in a little bit. But first, my name is Kiptum. Now in studio, we have Maranga, a policy advocacy officer at Ajira Digital, as well as Tania Ngima, the managing director of DijITali Centers, DDD. Welcome on set, lady and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Let's just start with some background. Could you just give us the background of how Ajira Digital came to fore?
Ajira Digital program is a government project run by the Ministry of ICT, funded by MasterCard Foundation and run by partners, KEPSA being one of the major partners, Immobilis and other affiliating partners. The program is purely intended at ensuring that young people in the country are provided with opportunities to grow their digital skills, as well as position the country as a digital skills hub in the region and globally. So that the young people are provided with different levels of training in different areas in the digital space, so that they're able to create more work related and be able to earn decent earnings out of their work in the digital space.
Right. Tania, just give us an introduction to DijITali Centers.
Okay. So DijITali is actually the Swahili word for digital. So DijITali Centers is a brainchild of Digital Divide Data, and I'm the managing director. So we kicked off our project. In fact, we like to say that our project is a little bit of a COVID project. We kicked off our project on the 2nd of March, and of course, the country went into, pandemic, COVID. The first case was announced on the 14th. So we've been around for about 18 months. Right. Maybe the biggest difference between possibly the Ajira Centers and ours is we work with already existing entrepreneurs who owned cyber cafes or digital centers. So the reason we call them digital centers is because to a very large extent, they are not any longer in the role of helping people access the internet. So they do a lot more things, and that's really what the DijITali centers are. We have about 500 across the country in 45 out of 47 counties. And I'll be really excited to talk a little bit more about them, but that's how it came about. We work with already existing entrepreneurs who already had their own businesses, and our role has been to come in and to help them strengthen their revenue, create employment, and build capacity.
Right.
Yes.
Of course, the numbers show that digital is the way to go, yeah?
Yes.
Could you just take us through what exactly Ajira Digital is doing now for the youth to empower them?
In the country, Ajira has been devolved quite heavily through the partners. One, we work with constituencies through the members of parliament. So originally we used to have what we call the constituency innovation hubs, which morphed to become the Ajira Youth Empowerment Centers. So each constituency is actually meant to have a youth empowerment center. A number of them already have a number of those youth empowerment centers where we do a lot of training. Now the training is largely implemented by the Immobilis partner, who is ensuring that enough relevant skills are provided to the young people at that level. But number two, also we have what we're calling Ajira clubs within the TVETs and universities, which are also being operationalized by Immobilis, which is a partner within the Ajira project. And then your question was on how it is being...
how you're empowering the young people,
yes,
the actual things that you're doing.
Perfect. So it's in different levels. One is from training, and then the second part is after the training, then they are being linked up to different work platforms, but equally a number of them being requested to work with existing organizations that are providing digital work, so that they're able to earn out of it. But the third wing of it is that we are also looking at the government side. What can the government provide that can be worked on by people in the digital space? So we have a pilot project within the judiciary, for instance, where we are digitizing judiciary, and we have 2 work streams within the judiciary. We're doing transcription work. You notice currently, since the pandemic started, the court processes and proceedings have been happening within the digital space, largely through recordings and the virtual hearings and mentions and all that. So what happens within the judicial system, then they record those processes and proceedings, and then the Ajira comes in to transcribe those processes, whatever that had already happened, so that it's provided in the digital space, and that makes work much easier for people working in that space to access more content. And then other than that, we also looked at what already exists in the judiciary, and we're doing data entry work and scanning. So looking at what has already been happening in the judiciary previously, and so far we have scanned a total of 16 million pages of work that has been happening in judiciary over a number of years ago. And we were targeting 183 courts and 7 tribunals, which we have worked with. During COVID, things slowed a little because, of course, the courts ended up working at 30% capacity. It slowed a bit down, but at least quite a lot of work has happened around that place. But through the judicial work transcription process alone, we've been able to recruit up to 883 young people that have been working on that process continuously, while bringing on board other partners or companies that help young people work below, and youth innovation centers. I could pick one, for example, in Mbeere South, Youth Empowerment Center, which is a constituency innovation hub, more or less, that has brought on board almost 40 young people from that region that are transcribing real-life cases from the judiciary.
Tania, could you just give us an overview of what positions Kenya as maybe the next digital frontier?
So one of the things that was really interesting, and the reason why, so we had a lot of conversations over the past couple of years about whether cyber cafes are, you know, they still will exist in the digital age. And that's because as data has become cheaper, as access to mobile devices has become more ubiquitous, really everyone has access on their phones. So a young person doesn't need to go to a cyber cafe to access the internet, right? So one of the things that we realized is that the cyber cafes and digital centers were revived because the government moved all services online. So right now, a school in Nyamira or Busia or somewhere in Central, if they want to do returns or they want to do assignments, if they don't have a printer and a computer, they will use the closest digital center to them. So that's one of the things that really revived the aspect of digital and revived the kind of work that the digital centers are doing. So with regards to positioning the country, I would say that Kenya is probably one of the countries that's a forerunner in terms of like digital work. We have quite a large number of organizations, including my parent organization, Digital Divide Data, which does impact sourcing, which is basically like a BPO, but with an impact metric, which is youth empowerment. So Kenya has really been at the forefront. Even if you look within East Africa, we've been at the forefront of, you know, there's quite a bit of online work. Ajira is doing quite a bit of work in terms of digitizing different agencies and making sure that that work is distributed in a way that the youth can participate. If you look at platforms, whether they are the local ones or the international ones, you notice that a lot of youth will prefer to actually sit in their houses or in distributed locations and do work online. So I think Tania, those are some of the things that...
Allow me to cut you short there. Apologies for that. And in studio, we are having quite the fitting conversation here with Jared Maranga, the Policy and Advocacy Officer at Ajira Digital, as well as Tania Ngima, the Managing Director of DijITali Centers, DDD. Now, Tania, you have had the CS speak. Quite some telling numbers. 8% of the Kenya's GDP is contributed to by ICT. This puts us at quite a strong position, right? Continue with the points that you were giving us before we went on that link.
Remind me what your question was. No, I remember your question. I'm only joking. Okay, so you'd asked me how do we position the country as a leader in this space. And I actually think that we already are there. So just following up from what the CS has said, one of the things we noticed when COVID happened is that a lot of businesses moved away from brick and mortar, not because they wanted to, but because circumstances forced them. So we'd been having a lot of conversations with small businesses, whether it was micro entrepreneurs or, you know, a little bit larger than that. We had been having a lot of conversations around getting them to look at a hybrid model of operation and of revenue, which is, you know, have an e-commerce channel and have an online channel, use social media, as well as have your brick and mortar location. What happened is that COVID really forced our hands, because at the point at which, you know, lockdowns were launched, as social distancing was being encouraged, a lot of entrepreneurs really had to quickly figure out an e-commerce platform and go online. So we saw the emergence of a lot of platforms that were previously just social platforms, and now they became marketplaces. But even if you look at larger organizations, and I know digital transformation is maybe a word that we have thrown around so much that it's become a buzzword, but even if you look at the larger spaces, you look at corporates and larger organizations that have regional offices, what you'll notice is that if they want to do a digital transformation, for example, they want to launch a fully online channel, they will actually start with Kenya before they launch it to the rest of the regional or the other countries they have in the Pan-African space. And the reason for that is, even from a skills perspective, from a familiarity with getting online perspective, from a mobile penetration perspective, Kenya is still leading very significantly. But one of the key things I think that has really brought in the importance of a digital world and for people to go online, I think has been the consistent commitment by government to actually move a lot of services online. Because we've seen countries that try to move services online, and as long as it remains an option, the populace will basically just do what is easiest, which is, you know, go queue, submit your documentation in person, because we tend to stay in a place of comfort. But by the government's commitment first to take all e-government and e-citizen services online, it already pushed us to start thinking about being in the online world. So I think they made it a lot easier for people to start interacting with the digital world, just because we had already started engaging. If you need to apply for a passport, then you basically have to go online and you have to figure out how to submit your paperwork. So it had pushed us into getting comfortable with the online world, such that when businesses now had to accept payments online, it wasn't a very jarring experience. And I think we are fortunate in the fact that we also have mobile money that has a significant penetration, which makes it easy for people to do work online. So what I would say is that we probably need to do more in terms of skills and capacity building for the youth, and especially access, because one of the things that we've noticed, and when we are in Nairobi, we take this a lot for granted. If you approach a young person who's at the University of Nairobi or any of the universities within Nairobi or the outskirts, and you ask them, if you have an entrepreneurial idea, do you know who to go to support you? They will likely know or know someone who knows. Okay. This was heartbreaking on so many levels, but 70% of our 500 digital centers are in peri-urban and rural areas. When we go to the field, because we've probably done about 5 major field visits in the last 18 months, the further you get out of Nairobi, the less access there is to knowledge, information, financing, etc. Like a young person in the middle of, you know, some community in Makueni where you travel for almost 20 minutes without seeing any sign of life, and then you find a digital center. When you ask a young person in that community about a business and about e-commerce, they almost don't know what you're talking about. So we have taken certain things for granted because we have access in Nairobi, whether it's access to information, to knowledge, to finance, or even to someone who knows how to direct you or how to support you. So the capacity building and the skills building does really need to be done outside of Nairobi, and I suppose that's what we're talking about. So the thing we probably need to do is we need to democratize access to the internet, access to digital, access to information. A young person in Homa Bay or in Busia or Nyamira needs to know that they can go online and that they can do online work. So I think that's where we need to build capacity. But we really, I think, as a country are at the forefront of this digital space and of of, being online and being comfortable with being online to make our lives easier.
Right. I will get back to you on how DijITali Centers is just doing to bridge that gap in a bit. But first, Jared, could you tell us what the government, specifically the Ministry of ICT, is doing to reach out to the youth in Mashinani?
Several ways. Number one, through the Ajira Youth Empowerment Centers, as I indicated, each constituency of the 290 constituencies are ideally meant to have an Ajira Youth Empowerment Center. The ministry comes in, of course, with funding from MasterCard, as I indicated from the word go. Yes. Then to some extent support in equipping those centers, give staff to those centers. As we speak right now, we are at 101 constituencies fully operationalized with staff there and support mechanism to help young people to train along the way. But equally something else that we're doing through the implementing partner, that is Immobilis, for example, they are doing local trainings in the local in the community, actually calling community training. So other than that, we also notice the rolling out of the Ajira clubs in institutions of higher learning and through TVETs, and that more or less helps young people come more on board. I'm trying to say, for example, a youth empowerment center, if you drive around whichever longest distance you go to, you will somehow come across a youth empowerment center. I'm looking at a case in Ndiwa, for example, in Homa Bay, that are doing a significant job in the judiciary. Guys staying quite away from Nairobi, but still digitizing courts in Nairobi. And then, of course, the support through the Studio Mashinani, for example, that is being worked on by the ministry, and young people are getting opportunities to showcase their talent in those Studio Mashinani centers, not only showcasing their talents, but also getting the opportunity to more or less roll it, get it moving. If you want to record, I guess, some of the things that are happening. And I know this is a collaboration between the ministry and KBC. So to speak. So then, yes, the ministry really doing a lot, and to pick what the CS just said, that we're looking at the economy, or the digital economy growing by 33%. 33%. That simply means with that growth in that space comes with it growth in many areas, not only employment, not only work per se, but also platforms, expansion of platforms through which a lot of those things will happen, including payment and this buying and selling, when you say e-commerce platforms, work platforms, and so on and so forth. So then the direction that the ministry is taking, and the government generally in partnership with all other implementing partners, will more or less go a long way to expand that space. And when it takes expanding that space, it simply means that we have more work for people who will work in that space, more work for businesses, and more opportunity from businesses to the individuals that are work ready in that space. Right. And to do that work ready part of it is through the trainings that are happening. They're either happening in the youth empowerment centers, or they're happening in the clubs, different clubs. And now we're thinking about how do we look at the specialized areas, because for example, different clubs, different youth empowerment centers would probably be having more specialized skills, because in the digital space we're talking about digitally enabled work and digital work. So there is work that will be done digitally, and there is work that will be done by the support of the digital space. Yes. So we talk about digitally enabled work. And this is what, for example, Kenya Private Sector Alliance is supporting through what we call private sector engagement. Yeah. Right.
Tania, could you just take us through the bridging of this gap now? What DijITali Centers is doing, and maybe what more can be done by various stakeholders?
Okay. So, when we started having this conversation around how to address the supply and the demand side of youth unemployment, one of the things that we've realized is that it needs a multi-stakeholder engagement. So I like that there are so many different organizations who are doing different things, because the problem, even from a continental perspective, what we keep calling the youth bulge, and we keep asking whether it's a time bomb or an opportunity, it needs as many people to really participate. And one of the things that has been really exciting is, a couple of the ways that we've we've collaborated with different institutions. But let me start by speaking about what we specifically do and basically give a little bit more context into the DijITali centers. So as I mentioned, we have about just under 500 DijITali centers in 45 out of 47 counties. So there's only 2 counties where we don't have a presence, and we've been working to see, how we can get into those. It tends to be the ASA regions, which is the arid and semi-arid regions. There's 3 main things that we do with these digital centers in our network, and they are basically along our 2 biggest KPIs. One of our KPIs is digital inclusion, which they are bona fide doing, and the second one is, of course, job creation and reduction of youth unemployment. So the 3 things that we do with our digital centers and how we support them. Remember, I said these were entrepreneurs who already existed before we came into play, and that's one of the pivots that we did because of COVID, because we were unable to roll out our project in the way we had anticipated. So we just went and we tried to figure out what's the best route to market and what's the best route to effectiveness. So we work with digital centers that already existed before we came into the market, and we help them in 3 ways. One, we do capacity building and training, and capacity building covers a bunch of things. There's, how to do basic bookkeeping so that you are a credible risk when you go to borrow money from an institution, because one of the biggest challenges is really the credit gap. And then trainings are, we help them to figure out how to do marketing. So we have a course called Marketing 101. We also have a course that's probably been the biggest hit. It's called Design by DijITali. So we are very market driven in the sense that we respond to the needs that the digital centers actually face on the ground. So a lot of them are coming to us and saying, I have a client, they keep asking me for logos, they keep asking me to make business cards, and I've basically just been doing like letters. Can you show me how to, create a good logo? And then when we ran this class, and we've had quite a couple of digital centers participating, we take them through everything from, the psychology of color, what this brand represents, and then they've even extended it to the point where they have set up, some of them have actually set up like a division that just does design. All right, so that's capacity building and training. And with the trainings, we do a lot of trainings. We even have partnered with government institutions, especially around tax time, to show them how to file returns properly, so that if a university student walks in, they don't leave with, if they want to be registered as a taxpayer, they want to leave with a PIN certificate, but they don't want for someone to create an obligation out of nowhere. So we teach them the right way to engage with online government systems. And a lot of it is really around training them on things like NHIF, NSSF, etc., HELB, all these NTSA systems, KRA, filing returns, etc. So that's one pillar. The other pillar is asset financing. In fact, I think for maybe 80% of the DijITali centers who joined, they joined because they had heard about a digital center that had received some asset financing. We do our financing a little bit differently than traditional lenders. One, we have recognized that micro businesses and small businesses don't always have bank records that are going to enable them to borrow. So we also accept mobile money statements. And then we also place a very large premium on what we call engagement and participation. So when a digital center joins our network, they are assigned to an account manager. It's like an RM. And this account manager's role is to really understand their business, understand their ambitions, understand where they want to go. And then if they want to get financing, by the time they're asking for financing, we kind of have a wholesome view, sort of like an expanded KYC of what this entrepreneur is about. We know, are they serious about their ambition? If they want to buy equipment that costs $1,500, do we have enough confidence that they're going to be able to repay? And then once that is ascertained, how we do the financing is we don't give them the money. So if someone wants equipment, it costs $700, we don't give them the cash. We do everything with regards to finding a vendor, procurement, engaging the vendors to make sure that the warranties are in place and that they are on call to support our entrepreneurs and our digital center owners. We organize transportation, installation, so the equipment goes to the closest courier office that we are using, the closest one to them. So the most they need to do is maybe leave for about an hour and come back. And the reason why we did that is because we recognized, one, we are able to get better discounts if we are going in as an organization that is doing bulk purchases, and we can pass those discounts on to the digital center. The second one is, if you think about when we were heavy in the pandemic and there was a curfew, a digital center in, let me talk about Garissa. A digital center in Garissa would either need to leave their digital center with their attendant for a minimum of 3 days, because they need to travel to Nairobi, go maybe downtown to Kirinyaga Road, or go somewhere, look for equipment, engage with a couple of different vendors, negotiate, and then maybe go the next day, procure the item. By the time they're actually getting back to their location, there's an opportunity cost of between 2 and 3 days. And during that time, one of the things that they will tell you they're most scared of is leaving their premises of business under someone's care, and then that person sort of steals from them. So a lot of them do feel the need to be present at their digital centers. So we saved them that opportunity cost and the hassle. And also sometimes we have had cases where this equipment can be pretty delicate. If they're going to transport it, let's say for example by Sacco or by Matatu, there's a chance that when it gets to the other location, some parts have moved, and then we have another whole issue with having to figure out how to fix equipment that is in Garissa or that is in Busia. So that is how we do our financing. The repayment period starts when the equipment is actually at the location of the digital center. And then we're also able to help guide them. So one of the things we know about entrepreneurs, small and big ones, is that they can be quite opportunistic. They can say they want 10 pieces of equipment. Well, they only have capacity to absorb 2 pieces of equipment. So what our role as the account managers is to guide them on, this is what you procure. And then once you generate enough revenue from this, the next thing that you procure is maybe like a bigger printer or a media center, because we have photography and videography centers, or procure like a heat press machine, and then after that you can procure what we call a vinyl cutter, which is a big piece of equipment, and it's quite expensive for a small business. And then the third one is B2B. So when we talk about B2B, we basically are working with organizations. So we have about 5 or 6 clients that we've been working with, and what you will probably come across businesses that are based in Nairobi is that they understand the Nairobi ecosystem pretty well. They have a pretty good foothold on their footprint in Nairobi. They want to expand, but they're not sure how to do it, and they don't want to spend a lot of money on paying rent, hiring staff in some location, for example in Nyeri. So what we do is we connect them with our digital center. So our digital center owners and these entrepreneurs are actually people with diplomas. A lot of them have university degrees. They've done BCom, they've done computer sciences. They are very articulate. They're actually well studied and well-read business owners. So what we do is we are connecting organizations with our digital centers, and our digital centers can carry out some activities on the ground. One of the most recent projects we did was with a company in the renewable energy space. They needed to recruit sales staff in some parts of central region, and what they do is that when they have a recruitment drive, they usually have to hire HR people in the office because they get 1,000+ applications. So what we did is we had our digital centers, instead of the organization doing it from their office, our digital centers were able to handle the traffic, sift through the applications, filter the 95% of candidates who weren't ideal, use their physical location as an interview ground, and even when the organization engaged them, the area sales managers came in and used that physical location of the digital center to actually engage with them, and that has been, I think, the place where they've been meeting anytime they need to have like a meeting between all the candidates who were engaged as employees in that physical location. But the use cases are a lot. We have organizations that want to recruit merchants on the ground, and they use our digital centers to get people to familiarize themselves with the app or the service. We have organizations that we've done some marketing and branding, especially rebranding. If you don't want to hire an agency and you want to go into some far-flung location where you have clients but you can't justify the spend, you use our digital centers for a fraction of the cost, and we've probably been able to save our clients between 40 and 60% of what it would cost them to do it themselves.
Right. I think that's quite elaborate and very important that the empowerment is there and it's ongoing. Jared, if you could just take the viewer through maybe some things that they need to do to position themselves for these opportunities that are there.
Maybe I'll start by illustrating the whole process from where we start and where it ends. Number one, as I indicated, fairly every constituency has a youth empowerment center. In fact, some constituencies have more than one youth empowerment centers. The first thing to do is, do you have a skill to do something? Whatever skill it is, you are a plumber, do you have a certain skill? Ajira will support you in that case. Let's start from people who probably don't feel like they don't have a skill. So we get to those youth empowerment centers. If we are in the TVETs or institutions of higher learning, we get to those Ajira clubs already established there. Then they will go through a training, which runs for about 2 or so days, and then they will be placed under mentorship for a period of a whole month. So that period of a whole month, they are working with a certain individual or company that is already doing what you have learned. So for example, you learned on skills on transcription, skills on virtual assistance, and so on and so forth. So then you put under mentorship for a longer period of time, about a month, after which now you're free to start working. Not that you're not free during mentorship, but that towards then when you're done with your mentorship, you can now transition towards doing your own thing. Now, once you've transitioned to doing your own thing, now again, the government in conjunction with the private sector links you up with organizations or with platforms that will enable you to have that opportunity to continue offering the services that you're able to offer on the digital space. Now that we talk about private linkages to private sector. So then, like at the moment, we have partnered with about 990 organizations and platforms through which now we link up these young people to work with. In fact, we had started a conversation with DijITali a while back as one of the partners that would work in that space. So what young people ideally need is, number one, attend those areas of training, then be trained, go through the mentorship. Apparently what happens is that a number of us lose hope, especially during mentorship. You look at, we could do 100 people training, then about 70 or so will transition to mentorship, about 50 or so will complete mentorship. There is a lack of patience amongst young people to stay through the mentorship process to the end, and somehow that reduces their impact in the digital space. So one of the things, and then we keep on encouraging them, is to be patient. Nothing comes easy. You have to be there over time. I mean, you have to grow, and growth has to come pole, so to speak. So when they've done the whole of that training and they are able now to start working with that organization, and in fact, there is what the ministry has created, the Ajira Portal. People would visit the www.ajiradigital.go.ke, the platform that in the long run is intended to be a one-stop shop, that you get a job, pick a job, bid for it, and get. That's the long-term goal for that project. But at the moment, that portal is able to allow you, for example, get there, apply for training, and apparently the training are happening twofold, both physically and in the virtual space. So you can book up the training and you take it up either virtually or physically, depending on where you are. If it's virtual, still mentorship, you will go through it virtually or physically, depending again on where you are and how you arrange for it. So yes, that is how people will be easily getting into that space. But again, we have partnered with some BPOs to extend the level of reach to the young people. For example, our pilot project at the judiciary, we already are working with 2 BPOs, and those 2 BPOs are more or less placed. They have both satellite campuses or satellite centers. For example, the one that I mentioned in Diwa, there is another one in Swahili Port in Mombasa. We have one in Kirinyaga. I mean, there are several around the country. And then the idea is that where that center is, the young people who work in that center should be from that locality. So like that, then we're able to decentralize finance, we're able to decentralize work, and people work. The challenge that most people now have is the definition of what work is and what employment is. So you will find someone who is working online, earning 200,000, 300,000 a month. When you ask that person who is employed, tell you, I am unemployed. So people have not been able to really distill that even in employment, you're actually working. So that we deal with work as opposed to employment. You know, we need to be in a tie so that you look like you can wear your tie and work from home, and perfectly very well. We have very many virtual assistants working remotely. And the idea of, I think the idea of the ministry, and by the way, I'm not speaking on behalf of the ministry, the minister did. The work of the ministry then at the end of the day is to ensure that we have opened up that space to allow a lot of our people not unemployed people. And again, here we go wrong. We're looking at people who are unemployed to use that space. The digital space is open for work. Create different applications that come up. There is this case where we have young people in a club, for example, in one club in an institution, who are very good in software development. And when they are very good in software development, they are able to develop applications that will support institutions, different institutions, businesses, and so on and so forth. So what we encourage such a club to do is take up the digital space and be able to work within Ajira. You'll be able now to be linked to, for example, KBC wants a certain application that will support real live streaming. I know you already have, but you could want something to extend it. And there is a club somewhere that's able to do that. Then you're able to support it. Or you think of a club in Kisii town, for example, or whichever town it is. And there's a lot of work within the counties that can actually be done by young people through the digital space. These things to do with transcription, data entry, people doing scanning documents. In fact, even giving the technical skill. Imagine if you have a club in Nairobi University that is highly hinged into architecture, and they're able to provide architectural services to a county. That would not only be cheaper to the county, but it will also be empowering the young people to provide what they already have, so they don't have to wait until they get formal employment, so to speak.
Well, we have about 3 minutes to go in this conversation, and I would like to pick your thoughts on how you reach the formal education, people in formal education through TVETs as well as universities. How are you going to reach, or how are you reaching the people in informal, or those who are not educated?
The people who are, how we are reaching people in the informal sector, or informal outside employment, outside academia,
yes,
so to speak. That's where the youth empowerment centers are coming in. And earlier on I mentioned about community trainings, working within the community. We go to a community, for example, wherever you come from, and then we ask, what are the needs? There is something that the CS talked about, the Kenya National Digital Master Plan. I kind of mentioned it in his talk. The idea of that master plan is, for example, a larger services by the government have moved to the digital space, and we are still moving to the digital space. We want people to file their taxes. We want people to check whatever it is, all services that you need online. How then do we fully get into that space if the mamamboga we are talking about will not be empowered to get that skills that are able to do it? So we get to the time of filing our taxes, even ourselves in the digital space, we still look for someone to file our taxes. Maybe because we feel we don't have those skills. So that is one thing that digital master plan is addressing. Looking at how then do we empower every other person in that space, outside everyone else, including the people in the community, so they're able to fit into that space, be able now to embrace all things around the digital space, embrace mobile money. Now, of course, everyone is embracing mobile money. Of course, if there is any people who really aren't into it, they are very few as we speak. So a very good sign that everyone is moving towards that space. So then maybe with a larger engagement with partners like DijITali. Now DijITali is in a space of talking with entrepreneurs who already are in the field, and if they're helping expand that space, for example, it will then mean, and we are also training from the other side, for example, or we're also trying to look for opportunities, because another thing that we're doing as Ajira is look at what are the available opportunities both in the private sector and in government that can be provided in that digital space. There's something that the CS mentioned there, that he mentioned something to do with 1.2 million jobs. That's a research that was done by TIFA Research a few months ago, and it clearly indicated that we have, through Ajira project, we've been able to link up 1.2 or enable 1.2 million young people to get into the digital space. And that's the whole idea from government and from the Ajira point of view, that we're able to expand that space and get more people into that space, allow people to work, not only making work efficient, but also making opportunities available. And finally, I'm looking at, for example, other sectors of ministries, departments, and agencies. The judiciary, for example, is our pilot. And as I had indicated earlier on, we've been able to hire 800 and 83 young people. We've touched 103 courts. We've touched 7 tribunals. We've been able to transcribe and enter and scan the data that they already have. Okay. And that makes work easier, not only for the judges, but also for the lawyers. Okay. You know, the lawyer is seated somewhere and he wants to refer to a certain case. We no longer now have to walk to the Supreme Court to look for that case, but you can also get to the CTS account and get that case.
All right.
So we get more space in that area.
All right, we've come to the close of the conversation. I'll give you each 30 seconds to give us your closing remarks. I'll start with you, Tania.
I think what we want to do is we want to position digital centers as partners for organizations. So let's stop thinking about them as a hole in the wall. Let's actually think about them as bona fide entrepreneurs who are in 45 counties and who you can use if you want to expand or get visibility for your product. There's a whole range of things that we can do together. So that's what we want to do with DijITali centers.
Awesome. Yourself?
Let me encourage everyone, young, old, whoever it is, to get into that space. Visit www.ajiradigital.go.ke. All opportunities are available there. Trainings are available there. Then you can pick them up. We have no option. This is the direction we're going to. COVID came. It was negative, but somehow it pushed that into a space that largely would have taken us a lot of time to get into. But now that we are in that space, we encourage all of us to embrace it and create more opportunities for young people, even for organizations, private organizations that feel they have opportunities that can be provided in the digital space. The Ajira project is already here to help you digitize your work.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Asante.
Thank you.
Well, we have been speaking with Jared Maranga, the Policy Advocacy Officer at Ajira Digital, as well as Tania Ngima, the Managing Director at DijITali Centers. And we have been talking about matters digital empowerment, ensuring that you are empowered to take up your space in the digital space and make sure that you get those opportunities. Well, we take a quick break here on BizCheck. When we come back, a conversation about customs control, what is prohibited, what is restricted to go through borders. Do stay with us.